If you're a chef, you try all of the food.
Yeah,
If you're a filmmaker, you watch all of the films. This is how they're not all good films. Sometimes I'm watching
right.
absolutely horrible films, and you're learning from them. You're taking the pieces of what doesn't work, what does work, what could I have improved on, how could I twist it around? And there's a process of osmosis where you're just moving through it and accumulating.
Good day, filmmaker Robert Kolodny of the amazing film The Featherweight, among others. Robert, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, Robert, I am so thrilled you're here. And as I've been thinking about this conversation, I'm going to hit you up with kind of the wildest question I think I've ever asked. So it's going to involve college football, filmmaking, but just I encountered this Reddit thread when you visited the Criterion Collection, and I can't give credit to who posted this because their account was deleted. But they said, this guy is going to become a GOAT filmmaker in a few years, up there with Scorsese, Anderson, Fincher. Just watch. That's like amazing compliment. I wish I could give that person credit. And it made me think about it in this way. So you have, I don't know if you followed college football, but you had Lane Kiffin, who was at Ole Miss, leave for LSU, even when, and this is happening in other places in college football, even when their team is playing in the college football playoffs, they have them moving on to the next team. And there's always this obsession with what's next rather than what is. And I'm just wondering, you've had success. What constitutes success for in your mind as an indie filmmaker? And then why do you think we're just so obsessed with the idea of being what's next rather than what is?
That's a great question, and I had not seen that Reddit comment. That's insane. But yeah, I guess the question of what's next, which is like a very pervasive question, especially when you have a film on the festival circuit, is a weird double-edged sword because the reality of what's next exists in this nebulous space of there are many things happening at all times, and all of those things feed into the idea of being a working filmmaker.
Exactly.
Um, like you don't want to be a filmmaker who's made a film and then you're waiting around to make your next film because, of course, that's an opportunity that no one is going to give you. You have to forge it
Right.
yourself. And so my philosophy, I work a lot as a documentary cinematographer. My philosophy has always been, in order to be a filmmaker, you have to be a working filmmaker. Now, that doesn't just mean being a technician, but it does mean putting the hours in and looking at what contemporary cinema is and trying to be attached to it in as many meaningful ways as possible.
Yeah.
What's next for me is 50 things.
I love that answer. So not necessarily working you don't shouldn't be like, "Oh, I need to go to my next film set," but like maybe marinating in ideas, like at least staying present with the current trends. Because one of the other things that strikes me, Robert, is that you see even with the top awards and things like that, you look got an Oscar, may not have made their next film for another 5, 10, maybe they're it's I can't believe they've decided, "I won an Oscar, I'm moving out of filmmaking." So there is this idea too that if you aren't capitalizing on it, like if you aren't like pushing forward, like what are you even doing?
Yeah, exactly. It's really I'm not trying to demystify anything, but it is like any other profession where if you don't get up and go to work the next morning, then,
Right.
no one's going to keep hiring you. And sometimes going to work means you're on set
Yeah.
and you're working with actors, but most often it means you have a huge stack of books behind you and you're trying to get the next idea. You're trying to conjure something. You're working on a script or probably more often multiple scripts. Maybe you're in post on something else or advising someone else's film. It's all of these different facets. And so the idea of like linearity from one film to the next is really a myth because it's actually a very jagged line that is
Right.
interconnecting with many other things. And all of those things feed into what the next big thing is.
Yeah. I love that answer. Robert, how did you get started? Was it something you knew right away? You know what? I just have an eye for this. Or was it something that like people told you? Like, how did you get started in filmmaking?
I've been incredibly privileged that there's never really been a time in my life where I did not know this is what I wanted to do. I picked up a video camera for the first time when I was like 6 years old and
That's
started
crazy.
making films in the backyard with my brother, with kids in the neighborhood. And these like very small films very quickly began to escalate. There's a tape that I have from when I was like 9 years old, like VHS tape, my mom filming, and we're doing like a school presentation. And I come up to the microphone and I'm like, when I grow up, I want to be a film director. And yeah, and so that's just always been the path. And I think that's partially because at a really young age, I started very seriously watching films at the video store in my town. They had a rent one new release, get two classics for free thing. My dad would take me to the video store. He would rent whatever is new, and then he would rent two classics for me to watch. And
Wow.
really, when I was like 5 years old, I started watching things like Charlie Chaplin movies and Buster Keaton movies, and that quickly escalated to Humphrey
Huh.
Bogart movies and James Cagney movies. And by the time I'm 9 or 10, I'm watching Citizen Kane and Sunset
My
Boulevard, and
god.
I'm moving through the history of cinema. So my literacy in motion pictures is is very high. And I've kept that idea of cinematic education still. I still watch hundreds of movies a year. I go to the theater weekly. Yeah, and I keep like a very extensive spreadsheet, which I have up right here. I can tell you it's December 11th that we're recording this. I have watched 362 movies in the year 2025 so far. And
Ow.
I'll probably get up to 380. Yeah. But so I think it's an important, if you're a chef, you try all of the food.
Yeah.
If you're a filmmaker, you watch all of the films. This is how they're not all good films. Sometimes I'm watching
Right.
absolutely horrible films and you're learning from them. You're taking the pieces of what doesn't work, what could I have improved on, how could I twist it around? And there's a process of osmosis where you're just moving through it and accumulating.
Love that. I don't think I've heard somebody do that before. How do you handle film criticism? I'm curious on when you're watching a bad film, you must look at it structurally, right? You're not looking at it from the eye of just because obviously you're not a member of the general public. You're looking at it as a fellow director. So, what are your thoughts on providing criticism scientifically in a way for filmmakers? Are you looking at it in that way of here's what I would suggest that filmmaker could improve on if they asked you?
N- Not Not specifically, because I think the circumstances that every film is made in are very specific and very different, and nobody goes out and expects that they're making a bad film. They all want to be making a good
Exactly.
film. And without the idea of what the other side of the iceberg that we can't see is, there's no way
Mm,
to, as a director, criticize that you could have done X, Y, and Z. Certainly, there are cases where I'll look at something and be like, it's not how I would have done it. But also, that's none of
right.
my business. As I'm sure people look at the Featherweight, for example, and say, like, why was it a big documentary? I wouldn't have done it that way, which is fine. Opinions and the way you take in art is completely subjective. And that's what is beautiful about the form of filmmaking. Not only is it entertainment, but it is also art. And therefore, whatever you get out of it is fully subjective. And maybe one person says it's their favorite movie and another person
Yeah.
absolutely despises it. And then moreover, like the idea of criticism, I love criticism. And when I was in film school, I was very into reading like Cahiers du Cinema and Pauline Kael, and I have a real respect for real criticism as a part of the ecosystem and as a part of how we understand movies as a culture and as a society. And I try to continue reading contemporary criticism in places like Reverse Shot. And yeah, look, it's all part of the whole.
It is, and that's one thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is this idea of how to do film criticism well, and I think and too often nowadays it skews like almost everything in social media and media age, it skews to whatever will get clicks, and what will get clicks now is just trashing something with just reading reviews that bring up new adjectives that I haven't heard of for a film, and it's like, really, you're gonna be creative to come up with ways to destroy something that somebody set out a whole team of people set out to make something great, and just this idea of trying to find redeeming value in whatever you're watching. So when you choose those 380 films, is it just whatever looks interesting to you? Are you reading reviews on the films before watching them? How do you determine which 380 films you're gonna watch per year?
Yeah, great question. A lot of them come from just personal interest or trying to fill in blind spots of directors.
Yeah.
I am something of a completionist, so if I sit down and I'm like, I need to watch every Kurosawa movie, then I will spend a month and watch the 40 or so Kurosawa movies. So a lot of it is that, just moving through the career of the director so I could really understand what their work is, what the arc of their power was, and try to discern what their career is. Because you look at a great filmmaker and you say, wow, that's a great filmmaker. But then you go back, look at the building blocks that led up to them. Martin Scorsese didn't come out of the gate with Mean Streets. There were
Yeah.
films before that, like Boxcar Bertha. And y- it's reaffirming to watch films like that and understand what the process was of moving to what that person became. And then a lot of it is new releases and going to film festivals, which I do often. So there's a lot of contemporary films in there. And then also, I have soft spots for a lot of genre films. Around Halloween, I'm watching a lot of ridiculous slasher movies and Herschel Gordon Lewis films and things like that.
Robert, this has really helped me understand your path, right? So you started a production company in 2010. Your first debut feature came out in 2024. And in between, you worked with so many great names as a cinematographer, making, music videos, just like you said, working as a filmmaker. So along that path, so obviously, just from hearing this part of our conversation already, you're obviously very intentional about your filmmaking and when you wanted to start, and you have won several grants and awards. So looking back at that 14, 15-year period, was there anything specifically that you thought moved the needle? Wow, that was a seminal moment and moved it much further along the way than I would have expected? Or was it more just a gradual, okay, this led to that climb?
In retrospect, I could see that there were certain moments that were pivotal moments, but in real time, they didn't feel like that.
Right.
The idea was I don't wanna work at a pizza parlor or at a coffee shop. I wanna be making films.
Right.
I bought, like, a little camera. I would start shooting bands, like friends' bands playing. I would start shooting, like, going out at night with my friends to a bar or going to Coney Island and just making, like, little tiny short films. One of those short films became a Vimeo staff pick, and I remember when I got a Vimeo staff pick, all of a sudden it was like 700 views, 600 views, and then the next video all of a sudden was like 150,000 views, like overnight.
Wow.
And there was a sense of, wow, this is okay. This is big. This means something. Does it mean something? It certainly reaffirmed me. And then working on music videos with different artists, and some of those artists became like bigger musicians. And then, but it really was taking jobs. Again, this idea of being a working filmmaker. So I got a call one day from a fellow filmmaker, Robert Greene, asking if I wanted to shoot on a project that he was editing on. And I was like, yeah, sure. Make like a small amount of money and spend a day or two shooting. So I did that. And that film, I got to set, I wound up meeting Benny Safdie, who was directing this film. And it was a film about a basketball player named Lenny Cook. And we spent a couple days together. And I hadn't seen any of the Safdie's films at that point because there weren't a ton of them out. But yeah, so like accidentally worked with Safdie brothers for a little bit. And then because I guess I did an okay job on that when Robert Greene was making his next movie, Kate Plays Christine, I got to come on and do a little additional cinematography with Sean Price Williams. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, these are names that are like bigger names. Friends with Robert Greene, friends with Sean Price Williams. I get looped in with Alex Ross Perry. We make a music video together. He likes how we work together, so we make a feature together. And so it just is slowly building. I work on a couple of Robert Greene's documentaries. Another documentary producer, Bennett Elliott, that works with him, asks if I would like to shoot with Nan Golden for a few days. Yeah, I would love to shoot with Nan Golden for a few days. Incredible photographer. Shoot with her many times over the course of months. All of a sudden, Laura Poitras is directing that movie. All of a sudden, that's All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. All of a sudden, that's winning at Venice, getting nominated for an Oscar. And so it's these little steps, again, partially as a working person. There is like a working class mentality to it of
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up the camera, I'm going to trudge through the snow, I'm going to go to the place. I don't know if anything is going to come of this. And in many cases, nothing comes of it. But every once in a while, there's this diamond in the rough. And sometimes you could feel it like, oh, we're shooting something at it and it means something and it's important. And I feel that reverberation. But yeah, that's the process.
Wow. So when you're having those conversations with the directors and with other people on projects, what are you thinking of? What are you asking them? Because it's not just coincidence that all these people that you worked with, other stars shown so brightly later on. Like you had to have like a talent gauge in your mind of, okay, this is a person that I want to work with. So if somebody's just like emailing you off your website being like, hey, Robert, I want you to shoot my film, and then looking back on these conversations that you've had with your friends, what kind of questions are you asking? And then what are you looking for when you sign on to a project?
I'm really looking at if the project is something that I feel like resonates with me. Is it a
Yeah,
subject matter or a character that we are following who is cinematic, who is someone who I would want to watch a film about?
right.
All of this film viewing, you do get a sense of, is this a movie that I would wanna watch? So that's the first question. And then after that is, who is this filmmaker and what is their style? Does it matter if they've done a bunch of things? No, not really. But what does matter is, how do they talk about their project? How serious do they take it? I take things very seriously. So when I'm working with someone, I want the collaborators to be taking it at least as seriously as I am. So those are the big factors.
That's amazing. So this leads us to The Featherweight, came out in 2024. Why that story? And then if somebody's sitting down to watch it, they haven't watched it yet, it's now streaming on Mubi. What do you want them to feel like after they watch it? And then before they go into that experience, what do you want them to take going into it?
The Featherweight was another film that was a quite long process that at the beginning came through some strange connections and at first felt like maybe it could be something big, but it was so distant that it took a lot of trudging to get to where it was. And I'm incredibly impressed with how far that it's gotten. The genesis of that film was I had spent a couple of years making a documentary in Bulgaria about a prize fighter named Serafim Todorov, who was the last boxer to beat Floyd Mayweather, and they fought in the 1996 Olympics. And I was trying to get this documentary off the ground. It was going to be my first feature doc that I directed. And I got very immersed in the world of boxing and was really fascinated with like all of the periphery characters in the boxing world, the manager, the trainer, the kind of like beleaguered wife that is like ever present, the former
Right.
rival. And so I was just very into that. I started going to a lot of boxing matches. I started like watching every boxing movie. And in the fall of 2018, a film that I worked on called Bisbee 17 that Robert Greene directed and Bennett Elliott produced was playing at the Film Forum. So I went to the opening night of that. And afterwards, there was a party across the street. And I was introduced to this guy, Steve Loff, who was a screenwriter who had written this film about Willie Pep. And we got to talking and we really hit it off. And so I got attached to this Willie Pep project, which eventually became The Featherweight. And for 4 years, we went back and forth. We would have early morning meetings at coffee shops. We would hammer through the script. We would remove characters. We would increase scenes. We would move things around. I just did script work for years. And part of those 4 years was like COVID happened. We were trying to make it before that, and we got shut down. We moved into our production office for a single day, and then the state closed down, which was a blow. But
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, eventually, look, we raised the scrappy amount of money. We got the actors. We made the movie, which is, just to use this iceberg analogy one more time, 4 years from meeting the guy to making the movie.
Wow.
Shoot the movie. We're up in Hartford, Connecticut for 2.5 months. Most of that is pre production. We have 18 shoot days. There are a couple of weekends in there. So that's a very small amount of time. And then another entire year of doing post production, editing, looking through the footage, getting the sound mix right, doing the color correction, taking my time, making sure that it is as idiosyncratic and detail oriented as I want it to be. Finish that. And then there's another several months, nearly a year of kind of playing this waiting game? Will it get into the festival that I want to get into? Will it be able to like hold the amount of prestige that I am attributing to it that I believe that it deserves? You're like a parent waiting for your kid to get into college. You're like, of course they could get into wherever. Uh,
Harvard, MIT, yeah,
yeah,
Stanford,
yeah,
yeah.
they're a genius. So you're just waiting and waiting. And then we were very lucky to get into the Venice Film Festival, and then we had an incredible festival run after that, and we had a little theatrical run in New York and Los Angeles, and got picked up for distribution, and now there's a Blu-ray of it, and
That's amazing.
when you could stream it, and so it's out in the world, which is of all the feelings the best feeling because it means that it exists. People could watch it. That's how I feel when I finally find a film that I want to watch on the internet. I'm like, great, I could finally watch it. Yeah.
Love it. So it's telling the story of Willie Pep in the style of faux documentary. How did you come up with that particular style for the film?
Like I mentioned before, I come from a background of shooting a lot of documentaries. So that's a language that I really understand and that I love. And I love specifically the early American documentary films that fall into that style of direct cinema and also cinema verite. Filmmakers like the Maysles brothers and D.A. Pennebaker and Fred Weisman. And Robert True and Associates. I love those films and that language of filmmaking, and also the connection that it has to early independent cinema, like early films by John Cassavetes. I feel like there is this camera style of the freewheeling handheld camera, which was a new advent at that time. And so I just love the kind of language of that. Now, a lot of that style was, or at least the conceit of it being a faux documentary or utilizing some of the language of nonfiction, was in Steve Loft's script. And some of that is
Ah,
attributed to Steve James, the director of Hoop Dreams. He was involved in the project for a while, and he was one of our executive producers. But at one point, he was helping with a version of the script, and he and Steve Loft brought in this idea of it being a faux documentary. And initially, that kind of resolved more as a lot of like interviews in between scenes. The movie Lenny, have you seen this? Yeah, so, like, Dustin Hoffman is playing Lenny Bruce, and it's all these scenes, and they have a gritty quality, and then they're punctuated with interviews with actors playing real characters. And so, like, for a while, that was the direction that we were going in, but as I got involved and reworked the script more and more, I wanted the filmmakers to feel more like characters, the texture of hearing the camera person's voice, and really just the body language of the camera. What feels realistic? Because I watch a lot of nonfiction films. What feels realistic for the interaction between the subject and the filmmaker? And so that aspect of it continued to escalate and escalate.
and I noticed you came up with names for the documentary filmmakers, and on one scene I saw, like, where did those names come from?
Yeah, the cinematographer of the film is my brother, Adam, and we just invented these 2 characters, Herman Zupan. I was Herman Zupan, and he was Murray Zupan. And that way the actors, because we did a lot of improvisational scenes within the film, the actors could
Interest
talk to us and refer to us. Like, "Hey, Herman, can I show you something?" And I found that as just generally as an acting technique, it was helpful. It's there if you want it kind of thing. And
Ooh,
Adam and I came up with kind of fictional biographies of who Herman and Murray were. And the Herman Zupan nom de plume is one that I've used in the past for a couple of other things. Yeah, it's just a character that exists in my mind somewhere.
that's fantastic. So, you must not be surprised that there are so many brothers working in independent film. Is that because it mostly obviously, you can only speak for your own relationship, but is it just because you can trust that person to a level that, it hardly exists elsewhere?
Pr- Yeah, probably. That is
Yeah.
certainly the case for Adam and I. At the beginning of this talk, I was saying that when I was 6 or 7 years old, I was running around in the backyard with a camera. Adam was there already. So he was already the first person on set. We have a ability to communicate with each other non-verbally. He understands what my aesthetics are, and also because he was trained in watching movies much in the same way that I was, we have a lot of the same reference points. And so that's just incredibly helpful outside of the idea and reality that he is also an incredible filmmaker and
Right.
cinematographer. So, yeah, I imagine that the Softies and the Coens are probably feeling some kind of similar way.
Yeah. So much of your filmmaking has made me think about things. And one of the other ones that I'm thinking about is this idea that you studio films, you go into a theater, any sort of like mass media, it's meant to be, I don't want to say dumbed down because that's not it, but appealing to the widest possible audience. And then the knock against indie filmmakers is that you could have a guy, a director, being like, I'm going to appeal to one person that's going to be so obscure. Feel like the featherweight falls in the middle of that. How do you feel about like independent filmmakers going too far? Are there films you watch and you think, "Man, you're just trying to make this as difficult as possible." That obviously is not something you should be trying to appeal to, is just limit my audience to one person just to prove that I'm a very complicated filmmaker,
There are certainly films that I watch and I think are pretentious.
right?
However, I
That's a
think,
great word for it.
yeah, that is a reality. But I also think it's so incredibly hard to make a film and so much work to make a film that there is, of course, intention in a filmmaker who's making a film that way. So I certainly don't begrudge anybody for making the movie that they want to make. Is that the kind of film that I would want to make? Would I ever want to alienate an audience? Not really. But at the same time, I'm sure there are people that watched The Featherweight and were turned off by the documentary style. It does exist in this area between what could be mainstream and what could be art house. And I think directors come to their projects with the best intentions, or at least the intentions that feel connected enough with their hearts that they're like, this is the film I want to make. And if that resolves in what some people think is pretentious, then I'm sure they're okay with that. Because it is impossible, of course, to make a film that all audiences will like. You are targeting a certain kind of audience or a kind of cross germination of a few different audiences. But I think everyone's hope is that people will like their work.
Yes. So when you made The Featherweight, did it feel comfortable to you as a documentary filmmaker? And then looking at the medium of documentary filmmaking, do you see yourself going down a path of sort of hybrid documentaries? Are you going to use AI in like a future documentary? How do you see The Featherweight fitting in? I know it's a narrative film, but how do you see it fitting in the mainstream trends of documentary filmmaking?
That is a really great question. I think I try not to disambiguate between fiction and nonfiction too much. I think if you're making a film, you're making a film and you have a certain set of tools that you could use to make it. And sometimes those tools are that we're using real people and telling a real story. And sometimes those tools are, this is an invention of my mind and I'm going to work with actors. So when I think about making a film, I've had ideas for films that could be something that I write or could be something that I like find the characters for, and it is a documentary. I think there's more language to explore in that space in between. Now, where I earnestly feel most comfortable is working with actors. I love working with actors. I love writing scripts. I love working with the narrative material. And in many ways, it's much easier than making a documentary. Making a
Right.
documentary is really difficult, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for documentary filmmakers. And that space of hybrid documentary, which I work in a lot, specifically with Robert Greene, who is the editor of The Featherweight, but also the director of Bisbee 17 and Procession, these films that I've worked on as a cinematographer, this kind of gray area of utilizing scripted techniques or elements of fiction filmmaking within the idea of a documentary. I think there are more boundaries to push there, and it allows you to work more in the language of poetics and experimentation than would be allowed in a scripted film just because the amounts of time and financing and the weight of the machine is far less. And then for AI, I don't know if that's something that is necessarily attractive to me. And in many ways, I feel quite despondent about the state of AI. But
Yeah.
also, like anything, like the switch from film to digital, I'm sure there will be applicable tools that will help filmmakers work in a better way. Do I think that machines should be making stories? Probably not. Do I
Yeah.
think that some kind of digital actor is gonna give a better performance than a real actor? I would rather boil myself in a pot of soup than even consider such a ridiculous question. But yeah, those are my general feelings on that.
Amazing. Robert, one of the other there's so many fantastic things about the Featherweight, but the score. You mentioned that there's 41 music cues in it, 12 original compositions. Why was the music so important to you for this film? And it feels so inventive that you did it this way.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a ton of music in the film, but most of it is hidden. I could see people watching the film and being like, there's just that one song at the end. Just not true. There's 40 other songs, but they're all kind of playing diegetically, meaning that they exist within the reality of the soundscape of the film. And this is one of the rules that I set up for myself, both in production and in post production. We followed a lot of rules that we'd have a pretty strict adherence to. Every once in a while, we would bend them a little, but those rules were to keep the idea of would this happen in a real documentary? And of course, that carries over to the edit. And Robert Greene, who edited it, is a great documentary editor and understands these rules. Would we have a camera over here if this conversation was happening over here? Maybe on the day we got coverage, but is it realistic that we would intercut them? How did the cameraman get over there? We have to justify this rule. The same goes for music. We want to hear something here. Where is it coming from? If it's in Billy's room, then he's got a record player. Or if it's in the one of the theaters or stadiums that they're fighting in, there's a sound system there. Or if it's in a car, then yes, there's a radio. So we're hearing music weaves in these places where they could really be playing. At the banquet at the beginning, there's a live band. That's how we get the music in there. So it's a way of Trojan horsing these things in. And a huge
Wow.
amount of that work was done by Will Felker, who is our music supervisor and one of our big collaborators on the film. He really sourced all of these incredible songs and was able to find things that worked. And then equally, Retail Space, which are two incredible musicians who did the original score, composed these beautiful pieces that feel so much of a fabric of the film.
And why is that so important to you? That's very interesting that you made it the music that way, but I don't feel like a lot of films take that level of give it that level of importance of we need to make sure that this can only be playing organically. What was that just from your documentary background that you took that? Because I don't even think a lot of even documentaries are that rigid about it. So like, why was it that important?
It's partially because I'm an insane person, and partially because in a period piece, right? The film takes place in
Yeah.
1964 and then intermittently in 1941. And if we're going to sell the idea of this is a documentary that was made half a century ago, then how are we going to stand up and believe in that? It has to adhere to some specific guidelines. The sound has to sound a certain way. And I mean, let me tell you, this extended into the mix and into the coloring. So we were in post production. Ryan Price was our sound designer, and he and I were working as if we were working on the restoration of a film. There are certain scenes, like the 1940s scenes, we mixed them in mono because in the 1940s, that's what the sound would be. So it switches out of stereo. When we were doing the color correction, Sam Daly is our colorist, who is master colorist. We were really looking at what would the film stock be and would the emulsion have degraded and all of these things. And in production, we were shooting on lenses that were period lenses. So optically, we're really looking at things in front of the camera that hold this truth. And for me, I'm trying to build a world. And
Yeah.
not only do I need everyone on the crew to buy into that world, but I need all the actors to be able to, as seamlessly as possible, understand that this is the world that I'm inhabiting. Ruby Wolf, who plays Linda, I don't want her to go over to her dresser and open it up and it's empty. I want her to go to her dresser and it's full of like Linda's diary and all of
Yeah.
her jewelry and like a note that Willie had written her and all of these things. So really everybody in production, our production designer Sonia Foltarsh, our costume designer Naomi Wolflacher, everybody took all of this excitement that I was putting out and was able to translate that into, is it real? Can we make it real? And I think in the art of motion picture filmmaking, you are selling an audience a lie. And the more believable the lie, the easier the film works, the easier you can slip in and access what the director and the actors are trying to tell you. And so I'm just trying to dress up this lie in the most believable form. There's an act of conning in a way. You're
Right.
trying to get the audience to buy in. And anything that feels anachronistic, that wouldn't be there, or they wouldn't talk this way, or oh, I know that didn't exist until the 80s, or that doesn't sound right. These are things that take you out. And it's like the in-film version of looking at your phone and checking something, right? I don't want there to be a moment where somebody disengages. And so the more that I could cast my spell and the more that I could hypnotize, the easier I think the audience will allow themselves to dive in and be immersed in what the film should be.
That is wild, Robert, and it must have made casting great for the film because what actor and even behind the scenes, what filmmaker doesn't wanna go into that knowing that you put that level of detail into the work? Like, imagine showing up to a set and the director is just unprepared, nobody knows what they're doing, just gives you this feeling of, "Why am I here? Why am I wasting my time?" The opposite must have been true on your set. So, obviously, everything was important to you. Casting, how did that come about? And I looked for this answer on various interviews you gave, but I didn't see it. So the Band of Brothers connection, like how was that made? I looked for like the casting director. I was just like, there had to be something in there from Band of Brothers that brought some of these people together. So how talk about casting?
Casting is a process that I love, and I love working with actors. It's really my favorite thing. And so I was very excited to find the right cast for this. But it's worth mentioning that before I got involved in the project, before Steve Loft got involved in the project, the originator of the idea of making this movie about Willie Pep was James Matteo, who
James,
plays
yeah,
Willie Pep. He was a child actor. He was in Hook and Basketball Diaries, and he was a kid. And growing up in the Bronx, his dad was like, "One day you should play Willie Pep. He's a great Italian American boxer of the same stature as you. It would be a great role for you." And Matteo had a like newspaper clipping of Willie Pep, and he would bring it around and he would hang it up on his mirror when he would go to set. And in one instance, he was in LA and he had met Steve Loff on a production, and Steve Loff was like, "Who's this guy?" And Matteo was like, "Oh, that's Willie Pep. He's the winningest fighter in the history of boxing." Spark. Okay, let me help you make that movie. And then much the same when I met Steve Loft. It's Willie Pep. He's the winningest fighter in the history of boxing. Spark. Okay, let me help you make that movie. And so on and so forth, because it is quite an incredible record and quite an incredible character. One of these vestiges of American sports greatness that has withered into the rear view of history.
right.
Nobody talks about Willie Pep because he's not somebody that would knock people out. He's not charismatic in the way that Muhammad Ali was, and he's from this earlier generation. You really only hear about heavyweights from that generation, like Rocky Marciano. And so that's why we need to make this movie. We need to tell the story. And so, of course, James Matteo stayed connected. He was always going to be our Willie Pep, and his performance for me is a completely staggering performance. I
100%.
love him in this movie. And yeah, we were lucky that he has remained friends with these guys from Band of Brothers. So that's how we got Ron Livingston to play Bob Kaplan, the manager.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
yeah, so it was very serendipitous for us. And then the rest of the casting, we filled in with actors that I like and that Jim liked and that Steve liked. And I met a few new actors along the way. But there were certain roles like Sandy Sadler. Lawrence Gilliard Jr. was my first choice. I loved his work. He's D'Angelo Barksdale in The Wire, and he's in Gangs of New York, and he's in a few John Waters films. And yeah, when we reached out to him, he was into it. And yeah, it was a joy to go through the casting process. And Linda, who's played by Ruby Wolf, Ruby is an actress who I met a few years before working on a music video, and we just really connected. And I knew one day I wanted to work with her on a big role. And it was important that Linda be a character who is played by an actress who is not yet famous, because
Right.
there is this aspect of that's what her character wants. And so I wanted to be able to infuse some of that
Oh,
realness
man.
into this. An actress who like is really aspiring to be great, playing an actress who is aspiring to be something more than she is. And she took the role so seriously and just gave also, along with Matteo, just what I look at as a truly staggering, beautiful performance.
This is just so incredible. I feel like all of this is underrated. Like, I don't know. Like, do you get that sense? Like, so you've been to Venice, it's been a ton of film festivals, it got distribution, but somehow it still feels like just the thought process you've given to this doesn't show up in a lot of independent films, certainly not first features. So there's no way for me to ask you this and for you to reply humbly. But do you but I just feel like this is just such an incredible film that at times just feels, like, underrated. Does that resonate with you a little, at least a little?
Yeah, sure. Look, I want everyone in the world to be able to watch the movie. But there is a reality to one working in independent film where you just don't have a ton of resources and you can't pay into a extended theatrical run if you don't have
Right.
distribution. These things cost a
Yeah.
lot of money. And then there's also reality that the film market right now is really in flux in a way. Even with the headlines today are what's going on with the Warner Brothers acquisition. Things are very confused right now. The Featherweight, we made it on the tail end of COVID. It premiered in Venice during the SAG strike.
Yeah.
We had to get a SAG waiver because we were an independent production that allowed our actors to come. But and then after that, it's like all of these different kind of hurdles within the industry, which I think is optimistically I look at as the industry is changing, and that's not
Right.
necessarily a negative thing. We are just looking for what the new shape of it is. And the idea of like indie distribution is quite hard. So would I want the Featherweight to have played in many more theaters? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Would I want everybody to be able to watch the Featherweight? Absolutely. There are places that are emerging as places on the internet where you can watch films of a certain ilk. I think of streaming channels like Mubi, like the
Movie.
Criterion
Oh,
channel, where a lot of these films are winding up, and I think that's a great thing. Now, does your average non-cinephile throughout the United States have access to those channels? I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe not. It depends, I guess, on what the marketing budget is for Criterion and for Movie. But yeah, look, it's a hard gig. And also, there's so much great stuff out there. I watch
Right.
a ton of movies that are new movies every year. And every year, despite people being like, "Oh, there's no good movies out," that's a fucking lie. There's so
I
many good
hate that. I hate who
there's
says that. I just wanna interrupt and be like, "Stop. You're
there
clowning yourself."
truly, it's an embarrassment of riches, especially internationally. And so to break through in any way, even
Yeah.
as much as the Featherweight did, is like a miracle, honestly.
Yeah.
So I feel thankful and privileged for truly any person who's put their eyes on the film. Even in this moment, I'll thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
watching.
No, absolutely. But shocking, this must shock you as well. There's no, like, we are in the 0.01% of people that watch independent film. Like, the average person does not do an indie film podcast or watch 380 films a year, but I'm still always surprised, "Oh, wow, this film, like, how did I not know about this?" And there's no way that other people know more about, like, more films coming out, so it's just, like, an endless discovery process of just, like, new great film.
Yeah, which is beautiful. I'm
Yeah.
thankful for that. Even if it means like my film is more obscure, I'm so thankful
Right.
that there are great filmmakers making great films. We could look at the studio system imploding or the streaming model being flawed
Yeah.
or AI or industry strikes and be like, that's a signifier that the industry is failing. The only
Yeah.
thing that would really signify the industry failing is if interesting filmmakers weren't making interesting films, but they are. And so therefore, the industry marches on.
So, looking for your next project, before we get to that, I can't wait to hear that, but let's talk about, like, the process of the Featherweight. So you're also friends with a lot of great directors who've also released a lot of films. Like, what, and you went to Venice, so it's had a great run, but if you do it again, what are you changing in the process? If there's any sort of 1 or 2 things you can think about, just like the release and distribution that you would do differently the next time around?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like the little bridge that happens between the movie being finished and it premiering at a festival, so many
Yeah.
things happen. And this was my first time doing it. So some of those things I was like, oh, all right, we're getting a sales agent. Okay, we're getting like a publicist. Like I I have a more firm understanding on what those things mean right now. But for me, the dream would be on the next film if there was some kind of way to package it in a way where it could be potentially pre-sold. I think that is
Yeah.
a path forward that allows for a little bit more confident of a release. Now, granted, that is completely contingent on the caliber of the film and the marketability of the film, and I'm fully
Right.
aware of that. But yeah, those are things that I would try to maybe approach, not necessarily even differently, but just with a more thoughtful understanding on my own part. In terms of how we made the film, the passion that everybody put into it, no, I really wouldn't change much. I would like a
I
higher
mean, it
budget next time.
which you probably would be able to get if somebody sits down and watches a featherweight. So, are you able to talk about, because I'm sure whatever you're working on next, it will be the product of years of work. But is there anything you could talk about in regards to what's next for you?
Sure. So right now, I have a couple projects that I'm working on. One is a screenplay that I've just finished, which I think will be the next film that I direct. I spent like a solid 5 weeks. I went out to Will Felker, our music supervisor, found a place that I could just go and write. And so I went and wrote for 5 months and came out with a script that I'm very excited about. It's not a period piece for once, which will be exciting to make something contemporary. And so that's something that I'm going to start pitching now. But then actively, I'm also working on a documentary called For Crying Out Loud. And it's about town criers,
Ooh,
and there every year there's an international town crier competition. They're the people that walk into the town square and ring a bell and kind of dress in like antiquarian clothing and say "Hear ye" or "Oyez." And that's a film that I've been shooting for a couple of months, and hopefully in the next year we will finish that up and try to release it. Which is it feels like best in show. It's like a
yeah.
nonfiction comedy, and then there's a few other projects that I'm working on as a director of photography. So those are like the most immediate pies that I have a hand in. But then there are also 5 or 6 other ideas rattling around that
Right.
have various amounts of it being written on the page that I think are all ideas for films that I'm very excited for. I have no lack of things that I want to make. I'm constantly writing and dreaming and watching and reading and seeing and assembling the pieces. There's a few years ago, many years ago at this point, I attended like a conversation that Jean-Pierre Jeunet was having, who's the
Mm.
director of Delicatessen and City of Lost Children and Amelie. And one of the questions that was asked to him was, how do you know when you're ready to make a film? And he gave this analogy that I love and that I think of a lot, which is as I go around, I carry a briefcase and I fill that briefcase with little ideas and pieces of junk and magic that I find on the streets or in films or in books. And I keep filling it up. And when I can't close the briefcase anymore, I know that I'm ready to make a film. And I apply that to my own process. When I have enough things that like catch my attention or my curiosity or fascination, when enough of them come together, then I know it's time. It's time. The mold is full. It's ready to go.
Incredible. So, indie film podcast, Robert, love hyping other people's projects. Is there a film on that spreadsheet that you wish more people knew about, or filmmaker?
Oh man, there's so many amazing films that have come out this year that I think everybody should see. What comes to mind is Predators by David Ossett, Zodiac Killer Project by Charlie Shackleton, Ephus, which is a great, wonderful film that I feel like shares some DNA with the featherweight.
It
Uh,
does, yeah.
yeah, films like that, independent films, nonfiction films that are working within a form that they're challenging a little bit. Those are the kind of films that I try to champion more. In theaters right now, Peter Hujar's Day, which I just watched, which I thought was absolutely stunning with 2 great performances. Yeah, like we were both saying, there's no shortage of incredible films. I feel lucky as a film goer and audience member that there's so much to feast on.
The film is Featherweight, currently streaming on Mubi. What's the best way to keep track of your next projects? Follow you on Instagram? Is there a website?
Sure, yeah. My Instagram is my name, Robert Kolodny. You're welcome to follow me along there. I have a website that's also the same name. And if you want featherweight specific news, there's the Featherweight Instagram. And again, it is streaming on Mubi right now and available to purchase on Blu ray. And the Blu ray has a ton of really fun special features and deleted scenes and commentaries. So great Christmas present.
Fantastic. Robert, thanks for letting me geek out here with you. Just incredible thoughtfulness about filmmaking. Thanks for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.